chandeliers of Echo Hotel suites glowed like constellations, their crystals catching every flicker of light and scattering it across the grand ballroom. Music floated through the air, violins guiding couples in elegant gowns and tuxedos as they glided across the polished wooden floor. Champagne sparkled in crystal flutes, and conversations buzzed at tables dressed in silken roses. The evening was a portrait of Lagos wealth and power, flawless, shimmering, untouchable. But at the far edge of the room, the portrait cracked. Melvin Sakarii sat at a VIP table set apart from the rest, his broad shoulders wrapped in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, his steel-gray eyes surveying the crowd. The wheels of his chair gleamed under the lights, polished but inescapable. 2 years ago, Melvin had commanded rooms like this, the ruthless, brilliant CEO whose handshake could tilt markets. But tonight, whispers followed him instead of respect. The billionaire who lost his legs, the man whose fiancée walked away. The pity stung sharper than the accident itself. His untouched glass of champagne trembled slightly in his hand. Every laugh from the dance floor echoed in his chest like a cruel reminder. This was a night for lovers, not for men who had been left behind. He leaned back, forcing his expression into a mask of indifference, though inside he was weary, hollow. For months he had lived behind glass, present, but not part of anything. Then, through the symphony of polite laughter and measured clinking of glasses, a different sound broke free. Not refined, not restrained, bright, unfiltered laughter. Melvin's eyes snapped toward it instinctively. At a small table shoved against the far wall, a young boy was balancing a napkin on his head like a superhero's cape. He giggled so loudly that a few guests turned in disapproval. But his mother, Megan Alexander, only laughed with him, her brown eyes alive with warmth. She wore a simple blue dress, nothing like the glittering gowns swirling on the dance floor. Yet somehow she shone brighter. Her laughter wasn't forced, her presence not rehearsed. She was unpolished, perhaps even out of place, but she was real. For the first time in months, something inside Melvin eased. He realized his gaze lingered longer than it should have. Megan wasn't dazzling in the way Clara, the woman who had abandoned him, had once been. She didn't demand the room's attention, but her smile, soft and radiant, made the crowded ballroom feel suddenly quieter. For a fleeting moment, Melvin forgot his wheelchair, forgot the whispers, forgot everything except the lightness her presence carried. The boy spotted him then, pointing across the hall with wide eyes. "Mommy, look! That man has the coolest chair ever!" The words rang out over the music, and heads turned sharply toward Melvin. Normally, such remarks sliced through him, reopening wounds he tried to hide. But tonight, when he met the boy's green eyes, there was no pity, only admiration, innocent and sincere. The boy grinned proudly as if he had discovered a hero. Megan blushed, murmuring apologies as she tried to hush her son, but then she looked up, and her eyes met Melvin's. Not with embarrassment, not with judgment, with courage, a quiet acknowledgement, as if she saw not a fallen man, but simply a man. Their gazes held, steady, unflinching. For Melvin, the air shifted. The waltz slowed into a tender ballad. Couples drifted back to the floor, husbands clasping wives, strangers becoming partners. Laughter swirled with the violins. Melvin sat motionless, watching the world continue without him, his solitude a spotlight no one dared step into. But Megan's son leaned close to her, whispering something that made her chuckle nervously. She hesitated, biting her lip, and then to Melvin's astonishment, she stood. Her heels clicked across the ballroom, slicing through waves of curious stares. Conversations hushed. "What is she doing?" the room seemed to demand. Melvin straightened, preparing for another mask of pity. But Megan stopped in front of him, her smile playful, her voice steady. "Would you like to be my date tonight?" The entire ballroom seemed to freeze. Melvin blinked, certain he'd misheard. No one, not colleagues, not friends, not even Clara in her day, had dared approach him so boldly since the accident. He studied her face, waiting for the pity to reveal itself. But it wasn't there. Only mischief, only light. You're joking, he said roughly, his voice lower than he intended. Maybe, Megan tilted her head, her smile widening. But if you say no, you'll ruin the best entrance I've had all night. For a heartbeat, silence stretched. Then something broke inside Melvin. Not pain, not despair, but laughter. Low, rough, awkward at first, but real. His chest shook, the sound startling him as much as it startled the room. He hadn't laughed in months, maybe a year. The crowd gasped softly. Some whispered. Did you see that? He laughed. Setting his glass aside, Melvin met her gaze. For the first time in years, he felt alive. All right then, Megan Alexander, he murmured. Tonight, I'll be your date. Her eyes sparkled as she slipped her hand naturally onto the armrest of his chair. Without hesitation, she began to wheel him forward. The ballroom erupted in whispers and stares, but she didn't flinch. Together they rolled into the circle of dancers, breaking every unspoken rule of Lagos high society. Ready, Mr. Sakarii? She teased under her breath. He smirked faintly. Ready to be stared at like an animal in a cage? No, Megan whispered back, spinning the chair gently as her dress flared under the lights. Ready to become the star of this dance floor. The violins swelled. Laughter burst from her son as he darted in, cape fluttering, declaring himself the extra engine. Applause rose, hesitant at first, then thunderous. In the center of Lagos's glittering elite, Melvin Sakarii, the man they had written off, laughed freely as he danced without standing, carried by the courage of a woman and the innocence of a child. And for the first time in 2 years, he didn't feel broken. He felt human. He felt seen. The applause still echoed faintly inside the grand ballroom of Echo Hotels as Megan guided Melvin's wheelchair toward a side door. Behind them, violins resumed their rhythm, and whispers lingered in the air like smoke whispers of disbelief, admiration, curiosity. But out here, away from the glittering chandeliers and scrutinizing eyes, the night breathed easier. The door opened to reveal a quiet garden draped in golden string lights. Lanterns hung from low branches, casting warm honey glows over polished stone paths. The air smelled faintly of jasmine, blending with the salty breeze rolling in from the nearby lagoon. It was Lagos at its gentlest, a rare hush in a city that seldom slept. Leo darted ahead, cupcake in hand, chasing fireflies as if the night existed just for him. His laughter rang out pure and unashamed, breaking the fragile silence that clung to both adults. Megan settled onto a wooden bench, smoothing her dress nervously, while Melvin positioned his chair beside her. For a moment, neither spoke. The soft rustle of leaves and Leo's gleeful shouts filled the space instead. Thank you, Melvin said at last, his deep voice low, almost hesitant. His gaze stayed fixed on the string lights above, as though he was afraid to meet hers. For what? Megan tilted her head, forcing a smile. For dragging me out of that cage, he replied, nodding back toward the ballroom. I can't remember the last time I laughed. You gave me that tonight. Megan's chest tightened. She hadn't planned any of it. Not the approach, not the question, not wheeling him into the center of Lagos high society like they belonged there. It had been impulse, mischief, maybe a touch of madness. But looking at him now, his usually stoic face softened under the lights, she realized it had mattered more than she could have guessed. You weren't in a cage, she said gently. You were just sitting in the wrong corner of the room. And Melvin let out a faint, humorless chuckle. The wrong corner, that's one way to put it. The truth is, since the accident, I've been sitting in the wrong corner of life. Megan turned toward him fully, her brown eyes steady. Tell me. For a long moment, Melvin stayed silent. Then with a deep breath, he let the words fall. 2 years ago, I had everything. I was on horseback one morning. Riding was my escape from boardrooms and numbers. Then came the accident. A single moment, a single fall, and the doctors told me my legs would never move again. Overnight, I went from the man people chased to the man they avoided. My fiancée left before I was even out of the hospital. Friends stopped calling. Business partners spoke about me in boardrooms as if I'd already been buried. And every time I look in the mirror, I see a man half alive, sitting in a chair that feels more like a sentence than a seat. His voice cracked faintly at the last word, though he masked it quickly. The garden felt heavier with his confession, as though the string lights dimmed under the weight. Megan's throat tightened. She looked at him, not with pity, but with recognition. Slowly she said, "I know that feeling. Different story, same ending." Melvin finally turned his head toward her. "What happened?" She inhaled, the memory pulling at her like an old wound. 6 years ago, I stood behind a curtain at a wedding hall. My wedding hall. I was in a borrowed dress, holding a bouquet of flowers I couldn't afford, and I was ready to walk down the aisle. Then the groom took a phone call. His face changed. He came to me, apologized, and said he wasn't ready to be a father. I was already pregnant with Leo. He left, just like that. I walked out the back door, not the front, because humiliation is easier when no one watches. Since then, I've been the girl people whispered about, the single mother who got abandoned. I've been sitting at the last table in every room ever since. Her voice wavered, but she didn't look away. Instead, she met his storm gray eyes, daring him to see her truth. Melvin's jaw clenched, but his gaze softened. "So tonight," he murmured, "the abandoned groom met the abandoned bride." The words hung between them, raw and unpolished. But true. Megan chuckled softly, though tears glistened in her eyes. Fate has a cruel sense of humor. Or maybe, Melvin said quietly, fate finally got something right. Their eyes locked again, and the weight of their shared scars pressed them closer, not apart. In the distance, Leo shouted triumphantly that he had caught a firefly, only to release it seconds later, giggling as it floated free. The sight pulled a smile from both adults, a fragile but real one. "I used to hate rooms with too many lights," Megan admitted. "They made every flaw feel magnified. But here," she looked up at the soft glow of the string lights, "here I just see enough brightness to keep walking." Melvin traced the rim of his wheel absently, his hand trembling ever so slightly. "And me, for the first time in 2 years, I'm not afraid to go back inside, because now I know someone will look at me and see more than a tragedy." Megan leaned in, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "I don't see a tragedy, Melvin. I see a man who refuses to be defined by the corner he's sitting in." Silence followed, but it wasn't empty. It was full of unspoken promises, of shared wounds, of something fragile beginning to bloom. The MC's voice carried faintly from inside, calling guests for the bouquet toss. Leo ran back toward them, waving his empty cupcake wrapper like a flag. "Mommy, let's go catch the flowers for Mr. Melvin," he declared proudly. Both adults laughed, not forced, but with the kind of ease that cracked open the armor around their hearts. Megan stood, smoothing her dress, then met Melvin's gaze once more. "We've stood outside long enough," she said softly. He gave the faintest smile, nodding. "Yes, back inside, but not alone this time." And as the doors opened once again, the lights of Lagos spilled over them, no longer harsh but inviting, as though the city itself had chosen to give them both another chance. The morning after the wedding, the small cafe on Victoria Island where Megan worked was buzzing with the usual weekday rush. The scent of roasted beans and fresh pastries filled the air, while the hiss of the espresso machine blended with the chatter of customers. Megan tied her faded apron a little tighter, her hair pulled back neatly, and forced a smile that came easily to everyone else, but always felt a little worn on her. The bell above the door chimed, and a deliveryman stumbled in, his arms straining under a bouquet so enormous it nearly swallowed him whole. The cafe went silent as he made his way to the counter, every pair of eyes following the towering display of crimson roses and sprigs of baby's breath. "For Megan Alexander," the man announced, setting the bouquet down with a dramatic flourish. Megan froze, her hands halfway to a coffee cup. Heat rushed into her cheeks as the room collectively inhaled. She fumbled with the bouquet, her fingers brushing against a small cream card tucked into the blooms. With trembling hands, she pulled it free and read, "The woman who asked me to be her date, Melvin Sakarii." The breath she didn't realize she was holding escaped in a laugh, small and startled. Customers whispered behind their cups. Someone snapped a photo on their phone, and then a shrill voice rang out from the corner where Leo sat on his stool, swinging his legs. "Mommy, it's from the man in the cool chair, isn't it?" The cafe erupted in laughter. Megan covered her face with one hand, torn between mortification and warmth that spread through her chest like sunlight. She tried to hush her son, but Leo grinned mischievously, proud of his discovery. The gossip moved quickly, as it always did in Lagos. By late afternoon, co-workers teased her mercilessly, and regular customers smirked knowingly when they picked up their drinks. But Megan, despite her embarrassment, found herself smiling every time her eyes landed on the bouquet. It had been years since anyone had remembered her in such a tender way. That evening, when her shift ended, she gathered her courage and sent a text to the number scrawled on the card. "I'm free tonight. Where do you want to go?" The reply came instantly, as though he had been waiting. "Somewhere roses won't be trampled by high heels. I'll pick you up at 7. The restaurant he chose was nothing like the glittering ballrooms of Echo hotels. Tucked near the lagoon, it was a modest Italian place with wooden tables, flickering candles, and the faint strum of a guitar drifting through the night air. The scent of garlic and basil greeted them as they entered, intimate and warm. Melvin was already seated at a corner table when Megan walked in with Leo clutching her hand. He wore a simple navy suit, his chair positioned neatly at the table. For once, his expression wasn't guarded, and his gray eyes softened the moment they landed on her. "You beat me here," Megan teased, sliding into her seat. "Habit of a man who hates losing control," Melvin replied, then allowed a rare smile. "Though I've been losing control since the moment you wheeled me into the dance floor." She laughed, a sound that made the waiter glance their way with a smile. Dinner unfolded with an ease that startled both of them. Leo, perched proudly beside his mother, studied the menu like a serious critic. "Mommy, they have spaghetti with meatballs. I want that. But Mr. Melvin should eat pizza. Pizza's easier to cut," he declared solemnly. "Are you trying to manage my meal?" Melvin raised a brow. "No," Leo said matter-of-factly. "I'm the matchmaker. If you both eat the same thing, you'll match better, and then it's easier to fall in love." Megan nearly choked on her water, her cheeks burning crimson, but Melvin laughed full, genuine laughter that startled even himself. It was raw, unpolished, the kind of laugh he had thought he'd forgotten. For a moment, Megan forgot about the curious glances and the weight of her daily struggles. She only saw the man across from her, not the CEO in the headlines, not the billionaire in a wheelchair, but a man who could laugh like this. Over plates of pasta and tiramisu, conversation flowed. They teased each other, slipping easily between banter and vulnerability. Megan asked if he often sent flowers. "No," Melvin said firmly. "Then you usually send checks instead?" she teased. His eyes widened before he broke into laughter again. "Yes, and they call me practical." "Well," Megan said softly, "I like flowers better. They're cheaper, but truer." That silenced him. For a long moment he studied her, the weight of her words pressing into him. "Truer," he echoed quietly. I'd forgotten what that felt like. By the end of the night, Leo was yawning, his head drooping onto Megan's shoulder. She smiled apologetically, but Melvin only shook his head, his expression gentle. "It's late. Let me have James drive you home." On the way out, Leo stirred just enough to murmur, "Send flowers again tomorrow, Mr. Melvin. Mommy really likes them." "Oh," both adults laughed softly, and Melvin whispered back, "Every day, if she'll let me." The next morning, the headline screamed, "Billionaire in wheelchair pities cafe. Girl Lagos, unlikely pair. From penthouse to poverty, Melvin Sakarii's desperation date. Romance or charity case? Society debates the Sakarii mystery woman." The tabloids splashed photographs across glossy pages. Melvin's rare smile at the restaurant, Megan's hand brushing his arm, Leo laughing at the table. What had been moments of intimacy now twisted into pity and ridicule. In his Ikoyi penthouse, Melvin stared at the tablet in silence, his jaw tight. His assistant hovered nervously nearby. "Sir, the press is running wild. We should release a statement." Melvin's lips curled bitterly. Even the smallest happiness becomes a spectacle. For the first time since the accident, he had allowed himself to hope to smile, to feel alive. And now Lagos had turned it into fuel for gossip. Worse, Megan and Leo had been dragged into it, mocked as pawns in a cruel story. His pride burned hotter than his grief. As he closed the tablet, one thought pulsed through him. I never should have let them get close. The morning light over Ikoyi was pale and sharp, slicing through the glass walls of Melvin Sakarii's penthouse. He sat in his wheelchair before the floor-to-ceiling windows, Lagos sprawled beneath him in restless motion. Cars honked on Awolowo Road, ferries cut across the lagoon, and the skyline shimmered with ambition. Yet none of it reached him. On the coffee table before him lay a pile of tabloids, their glossy covers screaming in bold fonts. Pity date. Sakarii is seen laughing with cafe girl. Is Lagos' coldest CEO melting for charity? Each headline cut like glass. He had given the world a glimpse of his happiness. One dinner, one laugh, and Lagos had twisted it into pity. But what enraged him more than anything was that Megan and Leo were dragged into the storm. Their laughter, their innocence was now fuel for gossip. When Megan called that morning, her voice bright and tentative, suggesting they meet at her cafe after her shift, he forced steel into his tone. "I'm busy," he said flatly. "I'll be in touch." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. She whispered an okay before hanging up, and the moment the line went dead, Melvin shut his eyes. It should have been relief. Instead, it felt like loss. By evening, his penthouse was cloaked in silence. The city's hum floated faintly through the glass, but inside only the ticking of a clock filled the air. He sat rigid, trying to convince himself he was protecting her. Protecting Leo. If he cut them out now, the press would move on. If he let her go, she wouldn't be mocked as a charity case attached to a broken man. But when the doorbell rang, sharp and insistent, Melvin's chest tightened. He didn't move. The bell rang again, then the door swung open. Megan Alexander stormed in like a storm that refused to be ignored. Her cheeks were flushed, her brown eyes blazing. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't care. The sound of her heels against the marble floor echoed like accusations. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the silence. Melvin stiffened, his jaw clenched. "You shouldn't be here." "No," Megan shot back. "You don't get to decide that for me." He turned his chair toward the window, avoiding her gaze. "You don't understand what the press can do. They'll destroy you, Megan. They'll call you a gold digger, a fool, a pity project. And I won't let that happen." "Won't let that happen?" she repeated, her voice trembling with fury. "Do you hear yourself, Melvin? You're not protecting me. You're protecting yourself. From what? From the idea that maybe someone could actually want you?" Her words hit like a slap. He spun back toward her, his eyes storm gray and sharp. "You think it's that simple? You think you can just waltz into my life, into my boardrooms, into my headlines, and not pay the price? You don't know what it's like to be reduced to a symbol of pity, to have your name dragged through dirt because your body failed you." Megan stepped closer, her fists clenched. "And you don't know what it's like to stand at the back of your own wedding hall, abandoned with a baby inside you, to face neighbors who whisper you ruined your life, to scrub tables in cafes while people look at you like you're fragile or foolish. Don't talk to me about pity, Melvin. I've lived it, and I'm still standing." Her voice cracked at the end, but she held his gaze unyielding. Melvin's breath came ragged, his chest tight. He wanted to shout back, to defend his fortress of pride, but the words tangled, strangled by the truth in hers. Megan's eyes glistened, but her voice dropped, low and raw. "Do you know why I asked you to be my date that night? Not because I pitied you. Because I saw myself in you. Two people left behind. Two people everyone else decided were unworthy of standing in the light. I thought maybe, just maybe, we could remind each other what it feels like to live again." Her words cracked something inside him. For months he had built walls around his heart, stacking bricks of bitterness and pride until no one could get through. But now, faced with her fire, those walls trembled. "Megan," his voice broke quieter than he intended. "Everyone leaves. Clara left the moment I couldn't walk. Friends disappeared. Even business partners kept their distance. I can't—" He swallowed hard, his voice thick. "I can't survive being left again." Megan stepped forward, so close he could see the faint shimmer of tears on her lashes. She knelt in front of his chair, her hands gripping his trembling ones. "Then stop pushing me away before I even have the chance to stay. I'm not Clara. I'm not your board. I'm not the people who ran when it got hard. I'm Megan, and unless you make me leave, I'm not going anywhere." The room pulsed with silence. His breath hitched, his walls collapsing brick by brick. For the first time in 2 years, tears stung his eyes. He turned his face away, ashamed, but Megan reached up, cupping his cheek. "You're allowed to be afraid," she whispered, "but don't you dare let fear steal what could save you." Something inside him shattered not into pieces, but into light. His pride, his fear, his armor all stripped away under the weight of her honesty. He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch, and for once he didn't feel like the broken man in the wheelchair. He felt like a man who was still worth fighting for. Megan squeezed his hands tighter, her voice steady. "I don't want your empire, Melvin. I don't want your pity. I just want you. All of you, flaws and fears included. Can you give me that?" His answer was a whisper, but it carried more weight than any deal he had ever signed. "I can try." And in that moment, under the fading Lagos sunset bleeding into the penthouse, Melvin Sakarii finally let someone step inside the walls he had spent 2 years building. The boardroom at Blackwood Capital's Lagos headquarters was tense enough to snap. The long mahogany table gleamed under recessed lights, but its surface was littered with reports, projections, and half-empty coffee cups that spoke of sleepless nights. On the giant screen at the far end, graphs dipped where they should have soared, and the words Morimoto Group Negotiations, pending, flashed like a warning. Melvin Sakarii sat at the head of the table, his chair aligned perfectly, his tuxedo swapped for a sharp charcoal suit. His storm gray eyes, however, betrayed the strain. He had built an empire brick by brick, deal by deal, and now one contract, the billion-dollar partnership with the Morimoto Group of Japan, threatened to slip away. Mr. Sakarii, Mr. Parker, a veteran shareholder with a voice like gravel, leaned forward, his gaze unflinching. "With respect, the Japanese prize tradition. They value presence, ritual, strength. They see hesitation in your condition." He didn't finish the word, but the pause was louder than if he had, and Melvin's jaw tightened. His hands gripped the armrests, veins visible beneath the cuff of his suit. He had heard the whispers before, felt the sting of doubt, but never so boldly placed in front of him. A younger shareholder cleared his throat. "It's simple. Blackwood needs a leader who can stand in Tokyo, not one confined to a chair in Lagos." The silence that followed was suffocating. Melvin's pride burned, humiliation coiling in his gut like fire. For a moment he felt like the man abandoned in every room, discarded by friends and lovers alike. But then James, his ever-steady assistant, spoke quietly. "The Morimoto delegation is in Lagos tonight. They've requested a private dinner before their final decision." All eyes turned to Melvin. His pulse thundered, but his voice came out steady, low. "Arrange it. I'll meet them." The restaurant was understated but elegant, a Japanese fusion spot perched by the Lagos Lagoon, where wooden beams stretched across the ceiling and the faint scent of green tea drifted through the air. Candlelight flickered across bamboo screens, casting soft shadows. Melvin rolled in, every movement calculated, every glance assessing. But beside him, Megan Alexander was the opposite, light, warm, effortless in a cream-colored dress that skimmed her figure. She had insisted on coming when she heard about the dinner, despite his protests. You don't need me for business, he had muttered. No, she'd replied with a small smile, but you need me for life, and business doesn't get to borrow all of you. Now, as they entered the restaurant together, Megan's presence disarmed the stares that followed them. She radiated ease as if the world hadn't tried to label them only days ago. At the head of the table sat Mr. Morimoto stern, precise, every inch the image of tradition, and his wife, whose delicate smile softened his presence. They bowed politely, their eyes sharp with scrutiny. Dinner began stiffly. Melvin laid out figures, visions, and projections with precision. But the Morimoto's expressions stayed unreadable. Their eyes flicked to his chair more often than to his charts, and silence filled the gaps between exchanges. The board had been right. The image of a CEO in a wheelchair was not the one the Morimotos expected. Then the sashimi arrived. Megan, determined to lighten the air, picked up her chopsticks with awkward concentration. She managed to drop a piece of fish into her soy dish, splashing it comically. Her cheeks flushed, but instead of hiding, she laughed. "Oh no," she said with playful despair. 3 weeks of practice and I still can't master these. Mr. Morimoto, do you have any secrets so I don't keep turning sushi into soup? For the first time, Mrs. Morimoto giggled softly, covering her mouth. Mr. Morimoto's stern face eased, a faint smile tugging at his lips as he replied, "Miss Alexander, in Japan we say it takes a lifetime to master chopsticks. You have time." The table chuckled, the tension fracturing like thin glass. Megan leaned forward, her tone warm, her eyes steady. "Well, that's a relief. Luckily, I'm not here to prove I can handle chopsticks. I'm here because I believe in the man beside me, not for his legs, but for his vision." Her words landed like a stone in still water, rippling through the table. Mrs. Morimoto's eyes lit up, and she whispered something in her husband's ear. He paused, then gave the faintest nod. Melvin seized the moment. He spoke again, not with the icy precision of a CEO, but with conviction that filled the room. He outlined not just profits, but partnership, not just markets, but shared trust. And this time, the Morimotos listened. They weren't watching the chair anymore. They were watching the man. By the time tea was poured, Mr. Morimoto inclined his head. Blackwood Capital has a leader who listens and an ally who inspires trust. His gaze flicked to Megan before returning to Melvin. "I believe we can sign." Relief crashed through Melvin like a wave. His hand tightened on the armrest, his pulse racing. He bowed as deeply as the chair allowed, his voice steady. "Arigato gozaimasu." Later in the car, silence stretched between them. Lagos lights shimmered across the lagoon, mirrored in the glass windows. Melvin turned to Megan, his voice low, almost reverent. "Do you realize what you just did?" She blinked, feigning innocence. "Dropped sashimi and soy sauce?" He laughed, a rare, unguarded laugh that filled the quiet car. "You saved an entire company." Megan smiled softly, her brown eyes glowing in the reflection of the city lights. "No, Melvin, you did. I just reminded them what matters." For the first time in years, Melvin didn't feel like a burden in business. He felt like a man who could still command, inspire, and lead. And when he looked at Megan, the woman who had cut through pity with humor, who had turned his suffocating dinner into a chance for trust, he realized she wasn't just saving him. She was teaching him to live again. The physical therapy room smelled of antiseptic and determination. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a clinical glow over parallel steel bars that stretched across the polished floor. Machines whirred softly in the corners. Wheelchairs creaked, and the faint sound of measured breathing filled the air as patients waged quiet wars with their bodies. Melvin Sakarii sat at the edge of his chair, his hands gripping the rims tightly. Sweat already dampened his temples, though he hadn't moved yet. His therapist, Mr. Harris, a man with years of patience etched into the lines of his face, stood nearby with a clipboard tucked under one arm. "Today," Harris said evenly, "we'll try standing. No steps, no rush. Just standing." Melvin nodded once, curt. He had been waiting for this day, the day he would test his body against the prison he had carried for 2 years. His jaw clenched, veins rising in his forearms as he braced himself. From the corner of the room, Megan Alexander watched. Her heart pounded in her chest, torn between fear and hope. She had seen his storm gray eyes burn with ambition in boardrooms, seen them soften in candlelight dinners. But today she saw something different, a raw hunger, a refusal to surrender. "Ready?" Harris asked. Melvin exhaled, steadying himself. "Ready. On three. 1, 2, 3. Melvin pushed with all his strength, forcing every ounce of willpower into his long-forgotten legs. His muscles trembled violently, sweat rolling down his temple. His arms locked as he lifted himself upwards, veins straining, face twisting with effort. For one suspended second, his knees straightened, as though they remembered what they were made for. Then his body buckled. He collapsed hard, his knees striking the floor with a brutal crack. The sound echoed across the room, sharp and final. "Oh, Melvin!" Megan cried, rushing forward. Harris bent quickly, but Melvin shoved him away, his arms trembling too violently to support him. His breath came ragged, his face twisted in agony. "Enough!" he roared, his voice breaking against the sterile walls. "I can't do it. I'm nothing but a man in a chair. All this effort, pointless." The room froze. Patients nearby looked away, their silence heavy with understanding. Harris stepped back, respecting the moment, but Megan dropped to her knees in front of him. She didn't hesitate. She wrapped her arms around him, pulling him into her chest, even as he trembled, even as fury and despair shook his frame. He resisted at first, his pride clawing for escape, but then he broke. His chest heaved, breath catching in sobs he hadn't allowed himself in years. The tears came hot, burning down his face, and for the first time he didn't hide them. Megan held him tighter, her own tears spilling freely. Yet her voice was steady, almost laughing through the ache, as if defiance alone could hold it together. "Listen to me, Melvin," she whispered fiercely. "If you spend the rest of your life in that chair, I'll still be here. Do you hear me? I'm with you for you, not for your legs." His breath hitched. Her words stabbed through his pride, stripping him bare. "But if you want to walk," she continued, her voice cracking but unyielding, "then I'll walk with you, step by step, slowly, stumbling. I'll still be here. No effort is wasted, not one. As long as you keep trying." Her tears dampened his shoulder as she pressed her forehead against him. His arms shook violently, but he clutched her back like a man drowning. Harris turned away discreetly, giving them privacy, pretending to busy himself with the equipment. Melvin's voice cracked, a harsh whisper. "You don't understand. I was once a man who commanded rooms. Now look at me crying on the floor, clinging to you like a broken thing." Megan pulled back just enough to meet his eyes, her own glistening but fierce. "You're wrong. Do you know what I see right now? I see a man brave enough to fall, brave enough to fight again even after losing everything. That's not broken, Melvin. That's strength." For a long moment, silence held them, broken only by his ragged breathing. Then, against all odds, a rough laugh escaped his throat, tangled with tears. "You're insane." "Yeah," Megan whispered, her lips trembling into a smile. "But the right kind of insane. And I'm not leaving you." The last of his resistance crumbled. His head dropped into her shoulder, his sobs muffled in her hair. The weight he had carried, pride, fear, loneliness, cracked just enough for light to seep through. In Megan's arms, he didn't feel like a fallen CEO. He didn't feel like a man half living in a chair. He felt like someone who was loved without conditions. When he finally lifted his face, his eyes were red, but clearer than they had been in years. "You'll really stay?" he whispered, fragile as a confession. Megan brushed his damp hair back gently, her voice a vow. "I'll stay until you throw me out, and even then, I'll fight to come back." A trembling breath left his chest, part laugh, part sob. For the first time, he believed her. He believed that if his legs never worked again, he could still move forward, because beside him was someone who would always place her hand in his and walk the whole road together. That night, as the city glittered outside the penthouse windows, Melvin sat quietly with Megan curled against him. Leo slept in the guest room, his tiny breath steady and soft. For once, the silence wasn't suffocating. It was full of promise, of healing, of the fragile beginnings of hope. Melvin tilted his head toward Megan's hair, whispering into the dark, "You've given me back more than my strength. You've given me back myself." Megan's hand found his, squeezing tightly. "And I'm not done yet." Outside, the Lagos night rolled on noisy, restless, alive, and for the first time in years, so was Melvin. The bells of the Cathedral Church of Christ, Marina Lagos, rang clear across the city, their sound carrying over the lagoon like a promise. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting splashes of crimson, emerald, and sapphire across the aisle lined with white petals. Guests filled the pews, their elegant attire blending with the grandeur of Lagos high society. For once, though, the whispers were not of pity or scandal. They were whispers of awe, of anticipation. At the back of the cathedral, Megan Alexander stood in her wedding gown, simple, unadorned, but radiant beyond measure. Her smile shone like a guiding light as she clutched a bouquet of roses in baby's breath, her breath catching at the sight of the man waiting at the altar. Melvin Sakarii. He sat in his sleek wheelchair at the head of the aisle, a tailored black tuxedo framing his broad shoulders, his steel gray eyes burning with brilliance. Around him, murmurs stirred, but not of ridicule. These were gasps of admiration. Here was a man who had been written off, discarded, pitied, and yet here he was, proud, waiting for the love of his life. As the organ swelled, Megan began her slow walk down the aisle. Each step landed like thunder in Melvin's chest. His grip tightened on the rims of his chair as if bracing himself for the weight of the moment. He remembered the ballroom at Echo Hotels, where she had first dared to ask him to be her date. He remembered the garden string lights, her laughter, her tears in his penthouse, her vow in the therapy room. All of it had led here, to this aisle, to this day. When she reached him, time seemed to still. He looked up at her, his storm gray eyes meeting her warm brown ones, and the world dissolved until there was only them. The priest's solemn voice rose beneath the vaulted ceiling. "Melvin Sakarii, do you take Megan Alexander to love and to cherish, in wealth and in want, in sickness and in health, for as long as you both shall live?" Melvin's voice, low but unshakable, carried through the cathedral. "I do." The priest turned. "Megan Alexander, do you take Melvin Sakarii to love and to cherish till death do you part?" Tears spilled freely down her cheeks as she smiled through them. "I do." The congregation erupted in soft applause, but the priest lifted his hands. "You may now kiss the bride." Megan leaned forward instinctively, ready to kiss him in his chair, as she had countless times before. But Melvin held up a hand, his expression steady, his eyes locked on hers. Slowly, he placed his palms on the armrests. The cathedral hushed. Guests leaned forward, breathless. With a trembling inhale, Melvin pushed. His arms burned, his muscles quivered, and his legs, long silent, long forgotten, trembled under his weight. Inch by inch he rose. A gasp swept through the cathedral. He gripped one crutch James discreetly handed him, but his other hand stayed free. His body shook, but he stood. Megan's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes flooding with tears. She shook her head in disbelief, sobbing softly. "I want you," Melvin said, his voice breaking as he stood tall, "to have a memory you'll never forget, the moment your groom stood to kiss you." And with that, he leaned forward, his trembling body steady enough, and pressed his lips to hers. The cathedral exploded with applause, cheers crashing like waves. Cameras flashed like fireworks. Some guests wiped their eyes, unable to contain the emotion. Leo, dressed smartly in his tiny suit, jumped to his feet, his voice ringing out proudly across the hall. "Daddy is standing! Daddy is a superhero!" Laughter and tears swirled together. the sound echoing through the sacred space like the most beautiful hymn. The reception that followed burst alive with music, lights, and fireworks over the lagoon. Inside the cathedral hall, the polished marble floor became a stage for their first dance. Melvin leaned on his crutches, his arm around Megan's waist, while Leo clung happily to his leg. Together, the three of them moved in rhythm, not gracefully, not perfectly, but beautifully, swaying under the glow of golden lights. The guests cheered wildly. For them, it wasn't about spectacle or scandal anymore. It was about witnessing love strong enough to defy pity, pride, and pain. Megan lifted her face, tears shimmering with her smile. "Melvin, do you know what you just gave me?" His lips curved into a tender smile as he whispered into her ear. "A forever worth standing for." She tightened her grip on his hand. "And I'll walk with you. Every step, every stumble, always." Leo looked up between them, innocent and fierce. "We're a team forever." The music swelled, the fireworks outside painting the Lagos sky in red and gold. And in the center of it all, Melvin, Megan, and Leo held on to each other. Not as a man, a woman, and a child, but as a family. And for the first time, Melvin knew with certainty he had not only stood on his legs, but with his heart.